I will. Thank you. All right. Good evening. I'm here. I think I have my act together now. How are we tonight? Good. Good to see you. Thank you. This is brought this from our church. I don't know if you know. It sounds so icky to say we have merch. We do, but we're not selling it to make a profit. But if you ever want a New Hope shirt or a jacket such as this that I'm modeling for you today, or a mug, I think there's hats. There's a handful of things. I saw someone's on you. So we used to try to buy that stuff in bulk and hope we just got the number right, and it never worked out great. So Jonathan set up a system. If you go on our website, there's now a page, and then you buy it and it gets shipped to you. So we don't run it. We just kind of like host the page, if you will, and so you can go buy it for yourself. So you can get a jacket or a shirt or a mug or a hat. I think there's pins and other sundry things. Yeah, it's on our website, newhopeaubrey.com, and it's somewhere. If you go to the menu, the drop-down menu, I think it's the last one. So there you go. Tonight we're going to be in Titus chapter 2. We're going to get to this here in a second. Announcement-wise, since I didn't write it down, I'm trying to rack my brain of everything I'm supposed to remember. I got nothing tonight. Do I? Thank you. Rough Riders. Yes, okay, so that's one of them. Rough Riders game. I think there's still tickets available if you want to go. You're on it tonight. New Hope 101 is May 31st. You remember any others we got? Skeet Shoot Tournament is the 16th, so not this weekend, the next weekend. Senior Sunday, we're having some graduating seniors as part of our service, or we're going to present them at the end of the service on the 17th. You don't even know that yet, but that's coming. That's bonus material. So I think that's all the big major ones. Next week is our monthly business meeting. We're very close. That's this Sunday. Yeah. It is a good reminder that you have 4 days to figure it out. You may be too late, but okay. Okay, but you can still thank God for her on Sunday. There you go. Okay. This Sunday, I'm excited. We have a guest speaker, a guest preacher coming. His name is Jason Young. He works for Denton Freedom House. How many of y'all are familiar with Denton Freedom House? Yeah, wonderful ministry. And so I've got to know him a little bit, and we've been planning for a long time to try to get him to come out to share a little bit about the ministry and then to preach for us. And so the schedule's finally aligned, so he'll be here Sunday. So come be a part of that with us. So, okay, well, let's talk about Titus. We're going to be in Titus 2, as I mentioned. I'm going to do a quick recap of where we've been in Titus, and then we're going to start our section tonight, and we're going to see how far we get. I have mapped out how far I hope we get, but we won't cover the entire section. I'm going to give you the overview of the section, and we're going to start working our way through it the next couple of weeks because there's a lot jammed in these couple of verses. But just by way of recap and reminder, Paul is writing this letter to his young protege in ministry, Titus. And we said Titus is not as well known, or his name doesn't show up as much in Scripture as Timothy, but he was well known to the people back then and to the church in Corinth in particular. He was very well respected. His name also shows up in Paul's letter to the Galatians, and he was young. But he was a trusted partner of Paul in ministry. He had been with Paul. Paul had sent him places in Paul's stead. That's where we get this letter. And so he wasn't a new one out of nowhere. He was a young man, but Paul had sent him, had stationed him, if you will, on the island of Crete. Because if you remember, the island of Crete historically was known for being kind of a wild, rough and tumble place, but the Christians there were struggling. And this is very similar to what we see Paul doing with Timothy, who he stationed in Ephesus, that some false teaching had crept into the church, and not just crept in, was causing all sorts of problems and dysfunction and disunity. And so Titus was sent there and stationed there to really put things in order, to establish godly leaders in the different Christian communities across the island, to combat false teaching and the false teachers, and to encourage and exhort people to live godly lives. And so we've summarized very simply the overall message, or the two main key themes of Paul's letter to Titus is the importance of sound teaching and godly living. So sound teaching and godly living. And so it's not enough, is what we're going to see a little bit tonight, to know the right things about God. That's important. That's good. But also, your life then needs to show it. And so you can't live straight if you don't have your theologies, right? That's part of it. But to seeing how they go together. And it's not just about correcting wrong ideas or bad ideas, but is your life then living according to what you know and what you believe about God and Jesus and all these things. So that's what we're going to see tonight. So last chapter, after the introductory material, Paul gives Titus, his first task was to establish godly leaders. And then he gives us some qualities and qualifications, characteristics to look for in a godly leader. So we looked at that positive example, and we said this is less of a checklist, chapter 1, less of a checklist of that they have to be all these things, and more of this is a portrait, this type of person. So there may be other qualities that are good, but you're getting an idea of the type of person that should be leading a Christian community. And then to contrast that, Paul spends the rest of chapter 1 outlining, painting a really dark portrait of the false teachers. And he touches a little bit on some of their false teachings, but more in chapter 1, it's their character and it's their behavior, and they're twisted and they're corrupt in all sorts of different ways. And so we have a picture of what is good, what to aim for, a picture of what is not good, what to avoid, what to watch out for. And Titus in particular had a duty and a responsibility to address and correct and clean up some of the falsehood and the false living. And then now in chapter 2, Paul's going to push it and say, this isn't just for leaders, by the way. And we've been saying this all along, that Paul is writing to Titus, but this is a personal letter in the sense that it was written by Paul personally to Titus, but it wasn't a private letter, something Titus would keep to himself. And so all the churches, all the Christian communities back then would learn from this and be shaped by this. But then even us today, we're not reading this just as a historical document. It is a historical document. It's real, but it also, as God's word, it speaks to us, applies to us, has authority to guide us in our lives today. And what's really interesting about this next chapter that we're about to get into, Paul starts breaking it down and applying godliness to everyone. Because it's really easy for us to say, yeah, we need godly leaders, and we got really high standards, and we're going to hold them accountable. And all that's really good and true and important. But it's really easy also to then be like, well, that's just for important Christians. That's just for leaders. That's just to remove ourselves. And Paul says, no, holiness applies to who? Everybody. This is for all of us. It might play out differently. It might look a little different. The stakes might be higher in certain positions as opposed to other, but this is for all of us. And so in chapter 2, he's going to turn his attention away from teachers and leaders in particular and apply it to anyone and everyone that belongs to Christ. And so what we're going to see, and this is what I mean by we're entering a section that we're not going to be able to get through in one night, because Paul is going to start speaking to how does this look for you if you're an older man? That's tonight's focus. If you're an older lady, if you're a young man, if you're a young lady, he's going to map it out in these big categories to show that godliness matters for everyone. And so here's what it's going to look like. And again, we'll come back to this at the end, but he's not giving us here a checklist as much as he's painting a portrait. Be this type of person. This is what godliness looks like in your life. Pursue these virtues, these good things. Be shaped in this direction. That's what he's painting a picture for Titus to lead and to teach and to explain, and for all the Christians back then and today to live by. All right? So he's shaping us. Again, he's not just giving us a checklist. I got to do this. I got to be better at this. He's shaping us. We want to be looking this way. And it's my last word of introduction, and I'm getting ahead. After we cover verses 1 through 10, so we're going to get through I think verse 2 or 3 today. But after we cover the whole section, Paul, he's kind of burying the lead, if you will, in Titus 2, where is it? Verse 11 through 14. He gives us the foundation and the power for how we live this way. And it's such a beautiful reminder when we get to it that who makes us holy? The Lord does. So he calls us to live to a high standard of holiness, but he doesn't just say, hey, the bar's up here, Steve, get up here, try harder. Toby's doing it, Steve. Why can't you do it? That's not what we're doing. We're not comparing and competing in that sense. As we'll find out, God, through his Spirit, is leading and empowering and guiding. He's making these things possible. So yes, we are held accountable to a high standard. Yes, we should be living godly, holy lives, but God is the power at work who's making it happen. So there we go. That's all I got for a way of introduction. So someone read for us. We're going to read the whole passage tonight, and then we're going to go through, 2 verses. Actually, okay. So someone will read for us Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Okay, thank you. So Paul again takes the teaching of the faith, or having right doctrine, right belief, and saying this applies and should shape and should show up in the way that you live your life. So he's shifting his attention here to the home. And he hits every key category to cover everybody in the home, okay? Old folks, young folks, everyone in between. He talks about slaves/servants. We'll get to that. Some of this passage has some cultural elements, but there is still, as God's word, it's true and authoritative. And so we might, as we work through it, we'll indicate what things might look different from back then compared to today, but the key truths and the key principles at play here are the exact same. And so we'll work through slowly to help us, okay, what does that mean for us in our lives, in our world today? So the first category, well, before we get to the first category of people, let me back up. In verse 1, my translation starts with this really key phrase, but as for you, Titus, but as for you. So what's Paul indicating here with that phrase? But as for you, what does that mean? What's he doing? Grammatically. So it's very personal. What else is he doing? Do what? Sort of. Yeah, sort of. What was chapter 1 about? Look at the end of chapter 1. Paul just spent a ton of time talking about what? False teachers. Now in chapter 2, he says, but as for you, so what's he doing? Titus, you are to be distinct. You are to be clearly contrary, different, opposed to the false teachers, not just what they teach. Yes, what they teach is wrong and you need to preach the truth, but also through how you live. Your example, your leadership needs to be different than what I've just outlined. So Paul is making a clear break, a clear change here. Don't be like them. Don't follow them. Don't move in that direction. Instead, be known for how different you are from the false teachers and that sort of thing. Now, he says, but as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Of course. I don't think anyone would want to do otherwise. I don't think, most people, maybe one or two somewhere, but most people don't go into ministry trying to be a bad guy, right? Well, you know what? I went to seminary so I can teach heresy. No one goes in trying to be bad and wrong. So it's important for us to kind of work through why is Paul saying this? One, he's emphasizing clearly and in contrast to the false teachers who are spreading falsehood. Don't do that. But also he's reminding Titus and those who are being led by Titus and who would read or hear this letter for years afterward, that he's talking about something in particular. Titus is supposed to focus his attention on teaching that which accords to sound doctrine. Sound doctrine. So there's some key details that we want to kind of parse out tonight that helps us understand what exactly Titus is supposed to be doing and what he's communicating and teaching. So the first thing for us to point out and to know is that there's a definite article in the Greek. It doesn't always show up in our English. And so a better translation, a more literal translation would be, as for you, teach what accords with the sound doctrine. Now, what difference or impact does it make if we put the sound doctrine? We're talking about one in particular, right? So, in other words, Titus is not free to teach whatever he thinks is good and right and appropriate, but that there is already an established standard. And we can parse it out not however we want, but the way that I summarize it is, Titus, your job isn't to tell these people what Titus thinks. Your job is to teach and preach the truth of God's word and the faith that has been passed down to you by the apostles. So, what is true and authoritative, not based on human standards, but based on God's standards. Titus, that's your job. The false teachers don't do that. They wheel and they deal and they come up with all sorts of stuff. Some of it sounds crazy, some of it sounds appealing, but it's all man-made. Titus, your job and your focus is to preach that which is based on the truth of God's word and the faith that has been passed down by Jesus and the apostles. So he already has a standard that he's to live by and to teach by, and then he's to promote that to his people, right? So that's the first thing that we want to clarify, that Titus has a clear focus, an objective that he's aiming for, and not just anything, but the truth of God's word and the faith as it was passed down by Jesus and the apostles. Secondly, a key detail here is the word that we translate as sound. Does anyone's translation have a different word there? Do what? Healthy. Okay, so the word that's being used here for our English word sound in my translation comes from the same word that we get the English word hygiene. And the connection is it's talking about that which is healthy and whole and fit, not sick, not lacking in any way. Another way to understand it too is something that is solid and firm, right? And so what does that communicate? What kind of doctrine is he to be teaching? It's not lacking. It's not lacking. So when you're preaching the doctrine of God, when you're preaching the truth of God's word, you're going to be preaching it as he's given it to you. And you're going to be preaching all of it, the full counsel of God's word. And so, as John Stott, a Bible scholar, put it, there's a connection here between what we're teaching and then also how we're living. So it's not just that you're teaching the truth as God's truth and all of the truth, that's part of it, but then the fuller understanding of it being healthy is then it doesn't just impact one area of your life. Let's think about it this way. For a human being to be considered healthy, does that involve their body? Yeah. Does it involve their mind? Yeah. Does it involve their heart, their emotions, their inside, their inner life? Yeah. As a human being, are those different levels or aspects of being human, are they disconnected from each other? They are deeply connected by God's design, right? And so we know this. Someone who has gone through grief or heartbreak, physically, it has an impact on them, right? Okay. So for someone to be whole and to be healthy, these different aspects of their life play into each other. And so the point here that Paul is communicating with this one thing, it's not just that Titus is to be a teacher and teach the truth. That is a big part of it. The people need to know the truth of God's word and what it means and what it says, but it's not just information. We've been talking about this a lot. It's not just, hey, false teachers are teaching false information, so you need to correct that with right information. That's part of it, but it needs to go beyond just information. The sound doctrine of God is that which is whole and applies to your whole life. So you need to know the right things so that you can then also live the right way. That's what he's trying to communicate more deeply here. And if we aren't fully picking up on that, this notion of, as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. So not just teaching sound doctrine, teaching truth, information, but that which accord. That which goes with, that fits with, that flows out of. So again, bottom line, one of our key themes of this whole letter is right teaching, sound doctrine, and right living, godly living, right? So that's what he's communicating to these people. So, and then Paul, Titus, this is what you're teaching, this is how you're leading, and then he's going to start categorizing or working his way through different categories of the home and the church. And he starts with who? Verse 2. Older men. Why do you think that he starts with this group? He hits all the key groups. Why do you think he starts with this one? Supposed to be leaders? Do what? Head of the family. Now, some of this, we could say, well, that's just cultural, That's what they did back then. True, in a lot of societies all throughout history. But I think there's something bigger and deeper at play here. I want to tell you a story. How many of you have ever heard of, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce the name right, but the story is still real. How many of you ever heard of the delinquents of Pilanesberg? Okay. How many of you heard of South Africa in the 1980s? So some of you may have heard this story. I love this story. It is fascinating. You're going to see how it connects to our passage here in a second. So back in the 1980s, there was a wildlife preserve in South Africa that had too many elephants. And so they decided they need to kind of cull the herd a little bit. And so they planned, I think, to kill off some of the older ones. But then a lot of the younger ones, they were going to ship to other zoos or parks or whatever else, to kind of spread it out, that sort of thing. And so there was one place in particular called the Pilanesberg National Park. And it was massive in its size and its territory and relatively new. So they were really excited to receive some of the younger elephants from this other park. It'll help, boost our park, that sort of thing. And everything was fine at first. Like, wow, this plan worked out great. You needed to get rid of elephants. We needed elephants. We got them. But then they started discovering some serious problems in their park. And rhinos were like going missing and then turning up dead. And they're like, oh, this isn't good. And so they're like searching and hunting, and they're like, poachers. It got to be poachers. But then they're looking at the rhinos, and none of the stuff that a poacher takes was gone. The rhinos were just dead. They kept showing up dead. And like, this is so weird. And they kept investigating, and then they started noticing that a lot of the rhinos had injuries that were consistent with elephant tusks. They're like, this is getting weirder and weirder. So they start setting up, this is the 80s, so not everything had cameras everywhere yet. And so they put up cameras throughout the park trying to catch and watch what was going on. And what they discovered was that there was a group of young elephant males who had formed a gang, and they were bullying rhinos. And not just like, hey, we're fighting for the same watering hole. These young elephants had joined together, and they were hunting. They were going around hunting for fun. And they would find rhinos and chase them down and bully them and attack them and even beat them up and kill them. And the park rangers were like, what in the world is going on? And they didn't know what to do about it. And they tried to separate them and keep them in different spots, and they couldn't fix it. And they're like, we don't know what to do. And the problem kept getting worse. These young elephants were just so worked up, and they couldn't figure out what it was, didn't know what to do about it. And they started studying, and then what they discovered was biologically something had shifted in these young male elephants. And in the pack, this group in particular, it's not just that they were feeding off of each other socially, that was some of it, but they found out that these group of young elephants in particular, and there are scientific names for it that I can't remember, but they were entering, think of it like puberty. The change a male goes under, and testosterone boosts and other things by God's design shift as a young male becomes a male. So same is true with elephants, but this pack of young male elephants were entering puberty earlier than they're supposed to, and the heights of their testosterone were boosted higher than they were supposed to be, and then they were staying in that boosted state much longer than they were supposed to. So essentially, these young male elephants were just amped up on like toxic levels of testosterone, and it was causing them to act like monsters. And so the park rangers and scientists are like trying to figure out what to do. We don't know. We've now identified what the problem is, but we don't know how to correct it. And so they couldn't think, and like, do we just kill them all? I mean, that we don't want to do that, but they're hunting all these other rhinos, and they couldn't figure out what it does. And then someone had this idea, kind of went out on a limb, trying to, my notes are all out of order. There we go. They had an idea, okay, instead of killing them, instead of removing them, which would be hard and dangerous, what if we bring in older male elephants? Let's see what happens. So they bring in older male elephants, and guess what happened almost overnight? These young bull elephants dialed way back. No more violence, no more aggression. They calmed down, and they became normal members of their herd. Who would have known? Who would have thunk, right? And so it was just like this startling revelation that these young male elephants needed older male elephants to not just keep them in line now as part of it, but to show them how to do things. And so once they inserted these older male elephants, the herd adjusted. And the young male elephants benefited. The rhinos benefited for sure. They weren't bullied or killed anymore. The female elephants, everyone adjusted accordingly, and they were blessed. And then it turns out this wasn't unique just to this park. Scientists have seen it displayed in other parks, similar things. With these young elephants, if they don't have older male elephants to guide them and keep them in line, they act a fool, and they cause all sorts of problems. But you insert a older male influence, and things start to then level back out. And so, now obviously, human men are not elephants, but you see that there's something here, right? And we're not elephants, and we don't live in a zoo, but studies have shown, haven't they? This isn't even like new. Like studies have shown, you don't even have to be a Christian to see this, is what I'm saying, is that godly men make a difference, is where I'm going with this, right? If you remove older, wise men from a society, from a group, from a home, the young men that come up behind them have no idea what they're doing. And what ends up happening? They make a mess of things. They hurt others, they hurt themselves, and that just gets worse and worse and worse, and everybody loses. But if you insert strong male leadership, appropriate, healthy male leadership, right, then those things kind of start to correct themselves. So again, I ask, why do you think Paul starts with this group? Because by God's design, I believe, they really matter. And they set the tone for the home. And they can kind of then set the tone from healthy homes to spill out into a healthier, community or church, and then society, and in ever widening circles. And so Paul starts at the top because these guys are important. They are to be good leaders, right? So he starts with these older men, and he gives us here several qualities or characteristics for them to live by, to aim for, to be held accountable to. So let's start talking through these one at a time. What's the first one it lists? Sober-minded. Does anyone have a different translation there? Do what? Temperate. Okay. Sober, temperate, sober-minded. Mine says sober-minded, so we're going to go with that. What does that mean? What's the opposite of sober-minded? Drunk, literally. A literal translation of being sober-minded is not drunk. So the idea that he's communicating here for godly men is, can you think clearly? Or is your mind clouded or influenced by something else? Now, the most obvious example is substances, right? Alcohol, drugs, something like that. That can cloud your mind, warp your mind, and make you not be sober-minded because you're not sober at all. So in one sense, he's telling godly men, older godly men, don't be addicted to these things. Don't be caught up in drugs and alcohol, that sort of thing. But are drugs and alcohol the only thing that can cloud a man's mind? What else can cloud a man's mind? Lust, yeah. So physical desires even. Okay, what else? Anger. Absolutely anger. Rage, wrath, good. What else? Pride? Absolutely. Yeah. So we're identifying, and Paul, without having to spell all of that out, he's identifying some things that godly men need to be mindful of and not be slaves to. Don't let anything, substances or desires or attitudes or whatever, don't let any of those things control you and cloud your mind and warp the way that you think. Fear, similarly, can warp someone's mind and take control of their mind. So the idea is that when you can't think straight, it's really hard to live straight, right? And that's what he's communicating here. And if there are men, so let's get outside of the church for a moment, so outside of the Christian focus here, and just in general, think about in a home, think about in a neighborhood or a society. If the men aren't sober-minded, what happens? collapse, chaos, problems, dysfunction. And it hurts everyone, right? Again, we're not talking about men only. We're going to talk about women, right? But he's starting here. So within the church, within the Christians community and Christian homes, these godly men need to set a good example by being sober-minded. Don't be like everyone else. Don't be attached to or addicted to or controlled by anything that's going to mess with your ability to think straight. Right? So we need men who are sober-minded. Okay? What's the second term? So, you have King James? I want to come back to that because I like that, and that draws out a really neat detail. His translation says grave. Mine says dignified. Does anyone else have something different there? Reverent, okay. Worthy of respect is a common one too. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So, godly men. Well, before I get into that, let me ask you, in your eyes, what makes someone worthy of respect? By the way they act? Okay. Character. Yeah. Do you have to perfectly agree with everything to respect someone? You don't. Can you not respect someone that you do agree with? Yeah, there are people that, like, theologically, they and I line up. We draw to the same theological conclusions. We're on the same side, if you will. But when I look at their life and the way they act, the way they treat people, the way they carry themselves, the way they lead, I don't respect them. And that's messy, and that's hard, but that's life. So again, what Paul is getting at here is not saying anything goes, but the core, their character. Godly men, you need to live in such a way, you need to have character that when people look at you, even if they don't agree with your positions, they respect you. Do you live in such a way that is worthy of respect? That is worthy of respect. So, can you give me some examples of what it looks like for a godly man to be dignified or respectable? Give me like a tangible example of respectable attitude and character and behavior. Does that make sense? Let me give you one example, and then you give me some more. Let me see. When they do something wrong, they acknowledge it, and they do what it takes to make it right. That's respectable. That's dignified. So it's not that they're perfect all the time, but can they admit when they're wrong? Can they apologize? Can they be humble enough to repair what they messed up? I think that's worthy of respect. Can you give me another example like that, a tangible example of a godly man being worthy of respect? Truthful? Yeah. Can you trust them? Can you trust what they say? Good. Relatedly, can you depend on them? If they say they're going to be somewhere, will they be there? If they say they're going to do something, are they going to do it? That's worthy of respect. Can you give me another example? Person of integrity. So what does that mean? They do the right thing when who's looking? Even if no one's looking, right? Yeah. How do they treat people that can do nothing for them? That matters, right? That's worthy of respect. Yeah, so do you see what I'm talking about? So Paul leaves room for us to wrestle with these things and talk about, well, how does this play out in real life, in our real lives? What does it look like for someone to be worthy of respect, to be dignified? Godly men need to be dignified. Okay. And then Steve, I was going to come back to yours, like I mentioned. King James Version says grave there. And now we can misread that and think that means they have to be very dour. They never laugh and they never smile, almost kind of like stoic. I don't believe that's the best understanding of that term. Grave means serious. When you look at this man, can you tell that he's serious? Or is he just a goofball? Or is he unreliable? Or is he a fraud? Does he take life seriously? Does he take faith seriously? Does he take responsibility seriously? Does he want to be someone who everyone respects without having to live or earn that respect? I don't take that kind of person seriously. Right? So is this a serious person in that sense? That's the sense of grave. Do they take you seriously? And can you take them seriously? All right, what's the next term? Self-control. Temperate. So there's some overlap here, right? There's a distinction. We're going to tease it out. But what does this one mean? What does it mean to have self-control? Or what does it look like for a godly man to exercise, to display self-control? Okay, so they have emotions, right? So they're not, unfeeling robots. They have emotions, but they aren't ruled by their emotions and feelings. Yeah. Think before they act? Absolutely. They can have perspective. Yeah, okay. How else do we understand self-controlled? Or what's another example? Give me like a tangible example of someone who has self-control. They know when to stop. That applies to so many categories, right? Can I give you a silly one that we don't often think about, but I think really matters, especially if we're looking for people to step up into leadership? I think it's really good for people to use humor, but you got to know your crowd, you got to know your people, and there's a line where it's not funny anymore, or there's a line where that actually hurts that person's feelings. Oh, I was just joking. I don't care. I think self-control is being mindful of your intentions, but also the impact of what you do. And do you know when to stop? Hey, if we're goofing around and it's getting a little out of control, do you know where that line is? I need you to be a leader. I need you to be, mature, essentially, right? So self-control is someone who has self-mastery, who isn't just driven or a slave to their emotions. Like, they have emotions, but they're not just driven by them. They can think before they act, right? At the same time, they're not driven by their desires, whether that's physical desires, lust, whether that's ambition, some pride, whether that's greed, right? So that they're not driven or enslaved to those things, or if they're struggling, they're not going to be like owned by negative thinking, right? They can seek help, and not just be like, well, if I think it, it must be true. They know how to navigate those. They know how to hold themselves in line, right? They have self-control. So this applies, my goodness, in so many areas of life. So on the one hand, we want them to have self-control when it comes to substances, right? We already talked about that. Hey, don't get drunk. Don't be beholden to those things. Sure, but can they have self-control when things don't go their way? When someone disrespects them? When they have every right and every opportunity to lay down the hammer and crush someone, can they express themselves in a way that is true and honest, but with self-control? Or do they lose their cool? Yes, ma'am. Good. Yeah. 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 She's mentioning James and where he talks about the power of the tongue and being mindful. Do I have self-control? Have you? I already know the answer, but have you ever known anyone that is a good guy, but man, he runs his mouth a lot, and he's always having to like kind of backtrack things because he speaks before he thinks. So it's not just that he's acting before he thinks; he's just talking. Yeah, or there's other phrases we can use that is maybe not as dignified for church culture, but people who are full of hot air is a nice way to put it. That's not a lot of self-control. How are you using your language? Yeah. So when I look at your life, do I see someone who's out of control, or who I can't trust because, man, okay, well, if he gets mad, well, he's out. And Proverbs warns about that, about going with someone who's prone to anger, right? Or there's something else. Is there like a clear, obvious weakness when we get in this situation, this guy's going to lose it? Right? Well, no. Strive to be someone, again, who's not perfect. It's not that you never mess up, but are you at least moving in this direction? Is there evidence that you have things yourself under control? Or do you know how to handle yourself and your thoughts and your feelings and your behavior, that sort of thing? So we're guarding against excess and indulgence. We're keeping our desires in check. We're learning how to stay disciplined with this. That includes things that aren't obviously bad in and of themselves. So yes, there are some bad things. Again, the obvious ones like drinking or anger or whatever, you can get out of control real quick and cause all sorts of problems. But someone who is self-controlled also shows up where they're supposed to, when they're supposed to. They're punctual. They are disciplined in terms of how they use their time, right? So self-control, these kind of things. They're not carried away by other stuff. All right, what's the next term? So there's these three that go together. What are they? Okay. So there's that sound word again, and he mentions three things. So faith, love, okay, in steadfastness. Okay. So sound, again, are they healthy? Are they whole? Are they solid and firm and dependable in these three areas? Faith. This one, what does that mean? So in one sense, the faith. Do they know what they believe about Jesus and why they believe it? Do they have a firm grasp on what it means to belong to Jesus? But then also, do they live faithfully? So again, not just head knowledge, but is there evidence in their life that they have solid faith? When things get hard, does this guy just give up? Does he whine and complain? Does he walk away? Or does he press on, right? When society pushes back, when we as Christians have views that society don't have, do we continue doing what is true even when it's hard or unpopular? Are we solid in the faith? What about this one, love? What do you think that means and looks like? To be someone who is sound in love. Do what? Can be some passionate, hopefully for the right things. What else comes up? What do you think Paul's pointing to, basing this on? Integrity? Okay, good. What else? Love who? All of them? Have you met some of the people that are out there? Have you met some of the people in our church? What? Love. Oh, even our enemies. That's hard. So where do we get this kind of love? Yeah. So this isn't manufactured. If we want the real thing, we got to get the real thing. So then we can go live it out, right? So being sound in love is not easy. It's important and it's powerful, but it also requires that we know where real love comes from and that we're planted and rooted in real love from God so that that love then can shape us and change us and then be poured out into others. Jesus simplified it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then what? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's what he's calling us to. And that's hard. But we need men who know it's hard but step up anyway. We need men who are making the effort and who are moving in that direction and who are, as silly as it might sound to use this language, falling more deeply in love with God and what his great love means and receiving that and then going and living that out with others, with all others. So the people they like, absolutely. Do you love well? I hope you love the people who love you. But what about the people who don't love you? What about the people who are messy or problematic? Do you know how to love well? And again, this preaches great and it lives real hard, right? Because some people we don't like, or they annoy us, or they hurt us, or whatever. And so sometimes this gets real complicated. What does it look like for me to love this person in this situation? How do I reflect God's love for this person in this situation? Well, we need godly men who can set an example, who can lead that. Not just pastors, but godly men in the home and in the community. We need men who have solid love because they've received and they're walking in the truth of God's solid love. Okay. Steadfastness, what does that mean? Unchanging. They endure. They hang in there. In Texas, we call it, they got grit, right? They stick with it. They don't give up. They don't quit. When there's pressure from the outside world, they say, but I'm going to love anyway. I'm going to hold on to my faith anyway, right? I'm going to seek to have self-control anyway. I'm going to seek to be worthy of your respect anyway, right? I'm going to be sober-minded anyway. I'm going to keep going and keep being faithful anyway. When it's hard, when it's confusing, when they're exhausted, when things aren't going according to plan, they don't just give up and give in. They keep seeking to be faithful. Okay. So again, as I throw my marker on the ground, Paul here is painting a picture for us. And can we imagine what having just a handful of this type of guy in this setting, in Crete, where they were known, they were famous, where they were like proud of being rough and tumble and a mess? And in the context of all these false teachers who don't just have false ideas, they have false ways of living, twisted, corrupted ways of living. Having guys who aren't necessarily perfect theologians, don't know everything, may not be gifted orators, but they live godly lives. What kind of tangible difference a handful of these guys can make? Right? Absolutely. So he's painting a picture of what godly older men can and should be looking like and striving for to set the tone for others who are around them. Because this isn't just about them getting their lives together. It's about what impact are you having on those around you, because you represent the Lord, right? And so your witness is on the line here, but the good and the blessing of others is on the line here too. Let me close with this, because I've got like -1 minutes. I want to put this in context again, if we can. Again, we're going to talk about women next week, older and young men as well. Titus himself, there's some instructions for Titus, and then we'll round out, the rest of the household with servants and slaves. We'll talk about that. There's some messy things we got to sort through historically, but we'll talk about it, put it in perspective. But when I say that this is a portrait more than just a checklist, what I'm saying is Paul's not giving this, Kyle, hey, do these things, get it together, get back to me when you're done. Hey, Steve, you go ahead and try it too. What's the context for this word, these instructions? What's the context? Who's Paul? Yes, Paul's talking to Titus, but Titus is talking to who? The church, community, men. This isn't, hey, you get your act together and you clean yourself up and you do all these things all by yourself, and I hope it works. We need godly men. Godly men step up. This is what it looks like. And then godly men, godly communities, men, women included. How can we hold our men accountable to this? How can we support them in these ways? How can we train up the next generation to come and live these ways? Do you see what I'm talking about? So it's not just it's not dropping a task on men. Hope you measure up. But this is what God is inviting you into. These are what his standards are. This is why he's given you his spirit, and men work together to support and encourage each other to live this way. Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron. And then what's the parallel? As iron sharpens iron, finish the verse for me. So one man sharpens another. You're not in this by yourself to do this by yourself. That's why he sent Titus. Find men who are doing this, and you grab them. And you help them encourage each other and set an example for others, right? So that you're not doing it by yourself. Remember, you don't have to go alone. God is with you, is for you, but also you have brothers and sisters in the faith who are in this with you as well. Last thing, and there's a two-part thing. This isn't optional, and it's not automatic. So in other words, God has set the standard. I want you to live these ways. This is what is good for you. This is what is good for your homes and for your churches, good for other people. It's good for your witness. Live in the ways that I've shown you. This is God speaking. God's the one who will empower us to go live in that way, but we need to know this isn't a suggestion. Kyle, James, guys, if you have time, can y'all look into some of this? Maybe do some of these things. No, this is the call on our lives. This is where we're supposed to be going, but at the same time, it doesn't just happen automatically. We don't stumble into holiness, right, and godliness. Effort needs to be made. God makes it possible. He lays it out for us. He leads us in it, but we still got to take the steps to move in this direction and to live in this way. Do we see this? Okay. So there's a whole lot here, but we recognize even before they get it all perfectly mapped out and all perfectly lived out, Paul is saying, Titus, move the guys this direction. Because as men are living this way, it's going to be setting the tone for others, and then it will spread in such positive ways out from there. Got it? Got it. What questions or comments do we have on any of this tonight? Yeah. A rough island. What else? Any other comments or questions on any of this? Yeah, she said, we can see the effects of this in our society, the lack of having this. Yeah. And it plays out not just for that individual in their home, it just starts to spread. Yeah, okay. Pilanesberg, yeah, the elephants. Yeah, how are they gonna know? Yeah. Yeah. Powerful. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's look at our prayer list now.